Hello, welcome to Constellations Conversations with Rowland Smith and myself, Nicola Dunn. Lovely to see you, Robert.
Good to see you too, Nicola.
We were having a little chat before we pressed record, and we thought we had a lot of topics, but we have narrowed it down that today would be about the interview. So really, what is an interview in a constellation sense? I guess it is the conversation that happens when an issue holder, if it's in a workshop situation, comes and sits in the chair next to the constellator. And all constellators seem to have a different way of approaching this and maybe have set questions, maybe are more organic, but they have a sort of an arc. And I guess it is the constellator who decides when the interview is complete and when the first steps are going to be made towards setting up a constellation. So, Robert, what are your kind of first thoughts about that?
My first thought is that the word interview is a funny one for that. Of course, in English, I'm not sure what it's called in other language, what it would be called. But it's not a job interview. And it is a conversation, but it's not a completely free-flowing conversation. It's a bit therapeutic, but it's not exactly psychotherapy. So it's a slightly fuzzy construct, I suppose. So, and especially as you indicated, especially given the fact that different constellators handle it in different ways, and there is no prescribed length of that conversation. It can be a minute, it can be 15 minutes. Probably, I would have thought actually 10 minutes. I'd be surprised to hear an interview that lasted as long as or more than 10 minutes. I'd be very surprised to hear that. So I suppose there's a notional sense of how long it is, but nevertheless, it is slightly fuzzy in many ways, and that probably is what allows for the latitude you describe, people working with it in different ways. So one way perhaps of understanding what's going on or what it's about, what the interview is to ask what it's for. And I suppose most pragmatically speaking, the purpose of the interview is to prepare the ground for a constellation. That's principally what it's for, because the constellator will be ascertaining facts and emotions that serve as the ingredients for the constellation that's about to be set up. So that's one way of defining it, I suppose. But even defining it in that way, I'm already thinking of caveats and exceptions to that rule. I'm not sure you've done this, Nicola. I have, not often, but I have done it. I've had a conversation interview that's not led to a constellation. It's happened rarely, but it has happened. I've had conversations which have been so brief before a constellation as to be absolutely minimal. I've had conversations where the issue holder barely speaks at all, and I'll go into a constellation and say, okay, well, this is clearly troubling for you. Let's just begin by setting up yourself, and we'll see where we get to from there. So it is a bit fuzzy, I'd say, with some parameters, but the parameters themselves move a bit. I don't know if that tallies with your experience.
Yeah, I think that's great, Robert. I think it has a loose agenda, and I use the word conversation, but it's not like a conversation we're having where we're sort of sharing equally. Somehow the constellator has some kind of agenda, even if it is to establish, first of all, is it going to be therapeutic to set up a constellation for this person in this moment? And as you said, there is, very occasionally it may not be the right thing or the best thing at this moment. And sometimes then the constellator may move into doing what I would call a systemic intervention in the chair with the client. So there is something that happens, but it may not be that it involves in a workshop setup that a constellation is set up. obviously I have colleagues who, if they feel that the therapeutic rapport between the constellator and the seeker or issue holder is unclear from either side, that they will set up a representative for the issue holder seeker and one for themselves as the constellator, and look at this as a sort of pre-test check. Look at what's the therapeutic chemistry there. And I think that's a very helpful thing to do if you really are uncertain about what's going to be possible, because at the end of the day, I think most constellators want to participate in something which has some potential benefit for the issue holder or seeker. So everything that is happening in that, it's interesting to find our word, isn't it? But that it is that initial discussion, let's say, is it going to lead to something that instinctually the constellator believes would be somehow useful for the issue holder and the seeker going forward?
Yeah. And the usefulness, I think, is sometimes best helped along if we can get the issue holder to focus on what aspect of the issue that is costing them most. And I say that sometimes because issue holders arrive with a general question. Like, for example, I remember many years ago running an organizational constellation for a woman who had a senior role in human resources in the organization. And there was a big redundancy program that she was effectively charged with designing and dispatching. And her presenting issue was, oh, it's so terrible, all these people are being let go and blah, blah, blah. And it was very hard to nail exactly, okay, but what's your issue with that? What is it? Because I'm not going to constellate the organization and its issue. I'm going to constellate what it is in that context that is difficult for you. And of course, once we set down that track, this became much more about her own sense of avoiding reality, essentially, because she wanted not to go through with the program because it would be better if she didn't have to confront anybody and take on the responsibility for doing it. So the heart of it was really about her not wanting the responsibility. That was the issue. And that then we could try and find something that would be helpful to her about accepting responsibility, which was much less about how can we make it nice for everybody going through this redundancy program. So for me, that's an important shift from the general question that people sometimes arrive with to the focus on, okay, but what is it in that that's affecting, that's difficult for you? Because once we get that, we can help.
Yes. So it's because people often bring, as you say, kind of life tasks, don't they?
Yeah.
Something is in front of them. And, you can't change her role, but it is likely that either doing difficult things, losing one's livelihood or whatever, has been impactful in her family in the past. So there's a possibility of dealing with what she brings to that situation, as hard as it is. So I think, in the interview, perhaps we're also looking at to what degree have the orders in this person's either personal history or family history gone awry. And how is that being reflected in the issue or task or intention that they bring? And that may not be made very transparent in the initial discussion, but I think most constellators will be holding some sort of tenuous link to that.
I like that, Nicola, because in a sense, that's what's most challenging about that conversation, because it's not a psychotherapy session. Their clock is ticking. People are expecting a constellation, both the issue holder and the people around the circle. And so having a set of criteria or a guide, a set of guide rails while we're listening, like having the orders in mind, I think is very helpful, because then you can, as it were, spot where the discordant elements are. I think the other, I mean, my metaphor for this is a bit like somebody sitting next to me and I feel like I'm almost passing a Geiger counter over them and seeing, you know, lots of the time it doesn't crackle, but occasionally something will really crackle. They'll say something and there's a change of tone, there's a strange word, they're looking away, and suddenly, you know, the crackle, 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 you know, and that's the point for me, where I'm getting the most information, I suppose.
Exactly. It's your sort of constellations-ometer.
Yeah.
It starts to kind of bristle at a certain point. And often it is, as you said, it can be that they say something, maybe with a very accepting, even tone, which just seems to clang slightly.
Yeah.
So then I have a sense at that moment that somehow we're touching the family's preferred narrative. That's the way I'll put it.
Mm.
So, and if you're going to, you know, remain in good contact with your family, particularly when you're younger, you need to, you know, eat the narrative, consume it, not question it, live in accordance with it. But of course, it doesn't always suit you in later life.
Mm. I love that, Nicola. I think that's absolutely brilliant. You've got to eat the narrative and the family's preferred narrative. Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful insight. It makes me think also of the ways in which the issue holder, consciously or otherwise, will, even as they are revealing the issue, will also be hiding it in some way, because there are aspects of it which they don't wish to acknowledge. And to put that a bit more specifically, I notice often with kind of more sophisticated issue holders who are a little bit practiced, maybe in the language of psychotherapy or analysis or even constellations, that they will introduce words like, you know, narcissism or projection or denial and so on, as if they've already understood what's going on. And yet they often, those are, you know, when I hear those words being used, those for me, although they don't crackle in the same way, they don't have the same visceral impact, I always think, that's a bit of a decoy or a defense, or it's you've put a scaffold around something and hidden it with those things. So I particularly listen out for, let's call it technical language, as well as what I would sort of call social media language. Like if somebody comes in and says, I've been othered by this person, or if they talk about, you know, body shaming, or whenever we get into social media language, I sort of have that as well as technical language as my two kind of watch outs. Like, okay, you've processed whatever you're feeling through these different washing machines, but, you know, there is a kind of, not money laundering, but there is a bit of narrative laundering that goes on in both of those.
I like that image too. That's great, Robert, because you're putting into words something which I maybe do instinctively but haven't really thought about. I think the thing about the labels and the way they sort of, you know, land with a clunk in that initial discussion is because they're separating. They in the sentence, they separate the issue holder or seeker from this other person. And if they're mentioning this other person, then they're important to them. And what we know at that moment is the labeling and the separating has not helped the issue to be resolved. So in a sense, what's happening is a light is being shone into the cracks. You know, so you sort of know, okay, there are separations here, there, and over in that corner. So really the client is helpfully unfolding something for you in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is why in constellations and in the constellation, language is so critical, and critical in its simplicity. I mean, the sentence is, I'm sure we'll spend another session talking about sentences, but the sentences we give people to say in constellations are always unadorned and very simple and short, and really free of any of those later accretions from, you know, psychotechnology and social media. And in a way, I think that process begins in the conversation or interview at the beginning, because I'm certainly very aware, I'm sure you are too, of the contrast between the language I'll use and the language the issue holder will often use. And I will be one way or the other, maybe this sounds a bit patronizing, but already trying to school them in a simpler way of expressing their issue. Yes, I mean, you have a wonderful facility with metaphors, and, you know, I might use some metaphors too in order to name things. But essentially, I'm trying to restrain the impulse on their part to be more complex or florid or poetic or jargony than they absolutely need to be.
Yes, because I think, you know, when we hear the jargon, in a sense, internally we're running back to the taproot. Something appears separated in front of us, but there was a time when it was joined and it was in union.
Yeah.
And that may be over several generations. So the language may appear modern, but the split may have begun quite a long time ago. Even if this is a whole other subject matter, but even if we took the tensions that sometimes arise between men and women over time, regardless of kind of sexual preference, but just the sense that society has dictated various roles. And so sometimes that may be described in a very modern way, but the initial, you know, family wounding may be several generations back.
Mm.
So this is a busy discussion, isn't it, Robert? There's a lot going on, and there is an arc to it, as you say. There's a sort of sense of a moment in time. There's a sense, I know some constellators who would just say, what's your intention? Person would say whatever they would say, and they would just set things up immediately from the intention without the discussion that we're talking about, but they would gather data and information a little more on the hoof as it unfolds. And then there are others who don't move into that setup until they actually feel, okay, I have some good foundations to work with you.
I think in terms of, I'm surprised a little bit by that idea you can just ask somebody what's your intention and get going. And I'm not sure it's valid in its own way, but the issue I have with that, I suppose, is that often issue holders really aren't clear when they arrive. In fact, I was running Constellations last week. I had one of my regular evening sessions, and I was conscious of a woman coming to that who was agonizing beforehand about how to present her issue. But what question do I, is this the kind of question, how do I frame it? Is this, lots of anxiety about the presenting of the question. And, I understand that. And I can hear that, particularly if people are fairly new to constellations, as this person was. But I always, when people ask me the question, what question should I bring? Is this okay as a question? Can you do this as an issue? I always say, actually, maybe you do something different. I don't know. I always say, don't worry about it. Just come and sit there and we'll get going. Because the information, it's, the truth will out kind of thing. The information's there. And if it's not there in your words, it's there in your tone. If it's not there in your tone, it's there in your body. So I think once you've said yes to doing a constellation, you can't stop it leaking, as it were, and it's probably okay to trust the constellator to find that material. Of course, it takes practice over time for constellators to be able to do that and not get drawn in too much by what's said on the surface. But I think the truth is always there somehow.
Well, I think, I will sometimes ask, people say to me, and we can talk about this another time too, about preparation before a constellation. I do ask clients, what's the intention? What's the wish? What would you like to work better in your current life? Because that involves a certain commitment. And we're all ambivalent about change. I understand that. But you're looking for at least a 60-40, 55-45% commitment to the change. And so, because the client or seeker is often coming, they're loaded with the challenge of the issue in front of them. And in a sense, they often want to share that, and get you to understand just really how difficult it is. And I think energetically, I'm sure you're the same, Robert, we can pick that up quite quickly, how difficult it is. So, but it's a sense of whether the client can bear the change, that to let go of something and to be open to the uncertainty of something new coming in. So I think I like an intention. I will often do a positive reframe around the intention, just because it is my navigating compass. I try at the end of the day to have worked with the issue holder or seeker in a way that is in alignment with the intention. I will spend a little bit of time on that just to get clear. If it's too vague, then that's obviously I can work with a vague intention, but I prefer something where the point in the pencil has been sharpened a little bit.
Yeah.
Kind of at least where we're heading in our first steps.
Okay, I like that. I want to take us off on a slight tangent. I think it's pertinent, but we're talking about the conversation or the interview as though it's just a matter of words and verbal exchange. And I think for me, at least, I'm sure you've got something similar going on. For me, I'm also got sort of two other things going on. I think, number one, the images that are being evoked in my mind, perhaps also in the client's mind, and they're often for me, images of the people in their family system. So it's as if I'm kind of looking with them through a kind of into a diorama almost of their family system, and then trying to feel, read, see the people within it. And this may sound shocking to some issue holders, but there are phases in the conversation where I'm almost trying to tune them out so I can see what's behind what they're saying, because sometimes it's distracting what they're saying, and actually I just want to have a look inside their system, as it were. So that's first thing about images, which I want to ask you about too. And the second thing is just the physical presence of somebody next to you. Because it's common in constellations for an issue holder to sit right next to you. There isn't when you have therapy sessions, Nicola, I imagine people sit on the other side of the room, or at least there's at least 3 or 4 feet. But at the constellation, they're right there, and you can feel, the body heat. You can feel tears rise when they rise, and it's a surprisingly kind of physical exchange. And I sometimes, and I'm interested to hear your view, at the beginning of a constellation session, I'll always say, look, if there's anybody here who's uncomfortable with me putting their hand on their shoulder during the course of the constellation, please say, and I won't, because it's never happened, but I say it anyway. In other cultures, it's not easy. And if somebody's in tears next to me, I will often put my hand on their shoulder and just wait. essentially. But constellations, is a bodily art in so many ways, and it's there right from the beginning when you feel the kind of the intensity, I suppose, of that person's body, in its difference from one's own, but also because there is a sort of shared physical humanity between the two of us. I think it creates a bit of a bond just being physically next to somebody. I'm hesitant to use the word empathetic. As you know, I have some issues with that, but nevertheless, that's going on too. So we have images and we have bodies, not just words.
Okay, brilliant. So I totally agree with you. And it's just nice to share the different processes. When I'm sitting next to someone, as we do, what's happening is I'm hearing the words that they're speaking. A film is starting to run through my mind, but often it doesn't have a dialogue, but it has flooding images, across many generations. And I have my body, all sorts of sensations are happening. I mean, the weird and the wonderful. But this is all data and information for me, because the client or issue holder seeker has very generously allowed me to kind of enter their field. So there is this dyad field that happens before the constellation is set up. It's also, there's also things happening in the holding circle while this discussion is going on. So there's a lot happening in the room that's quite thick at this point.
Mm. And
as you say, your one's constellatorometer, and I have a, like panning for gold, I have a constellations, gold panning sieve, which I'm invisibly holding up to see, what elements I can allow to just flood through back to the earth, and where the gold nuggets are. And so there is a lot happening in what often appears to be sometimes quite a quiet process for the constellator. But in a sense, it's getting away from our kind of busy, normal thinking, cognitive, preparing mind, and opening ourselves up in all these ways. So there is, in a sense, it's not that there's not enough information, it's the fact that there's so much information.
Mm.
And if you think of them as just multiple coloured threads, you're trying to find the right one to tug on to make the first step with the client.
It makes me wonder, and I'm conscious of time, Nicola, we should probably wrap up shortly, but it makes me wonder, I hadn't made this connection, you've helped me make it, about constellating as a creative process. Because there's something in the way you describe the gold panning there and the kind of openness to all of this information that I would associate with the creative process, insofar as a creative process, although it's named creative, that we are creating, I think it's as much a kind of receptive process. It's like we open to all sorts of stuff we wouldn't normally listen to and allow that in, so we're allowing in the other, the strange, the different, the new, the surprising, and without judging it too much. And for me, I think that there is a real crossover between the kind of constellating role at that point, and actually later in the constellation, and the creative process, insofar as you are allowing yourself to be the recipient of something in a as you said, non-cognitive way, and allowing those things to come out, I suppose.
And that's a beautiful description, Robert. And I would agree with you 100% that it is creative, because the gold comes from elsewhere.
Yeah.
We are working also out of time, out of Chronos time. So there is a sense, the way that creatives talk about their process, whether it's an artist or writer or whatever, that they are in a zone, they're in a slightly timeless or altered time space, in which things are coming to them and flowing through them. And I would say that's exactly the same in a constellating process. And it's why, to be honest, dare I say the word addictive? I don't know. But let's just say it is on multiple levels. It can be very pleasurable, even if it isn't always comfortable.
Yes.
It's a space that you want to go back to because there was so much that was given to you.
Yeah. I can't think of a better way of concluding our conversation. That's beautifully put. Thank you, Nicola. So we'll bring things to a close for now, shall we?
Yes. Perfect.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. You are invited to like and subscribe. And also, please have a look at Nicola's website, which is nicoladunconstellations.com, and mine, robertrowlandsmith.com. And we will see you again shortly.